The story of the U.S. Constitution is one of bold experiments, spirited debates, and enduring principles. It began with the Articles of Confederation, adopted in 1781 as a deliberately weak framework shaped by fears of replicating British tyranny. This League of Friendship gave each state one vote in a single-chamber Congress, denied the national government the power to tax or regulate commerce, and required supermajorities for major decisions. The result was drift and discord. States clashed over tariffs and borders, war debts went unpaid, and foreign powers exploited the weakness by keeping forts on American soil or closing key waterways. By 1787, the promise of independence was in jeopardy, and leaders increasingly agreed the Union needed a stronger foundation. Delegates met in Philadelphia intending to revise the Articles but soon chose to draft a new framework. There, they designed a government that balanced energy with restraint, three branches checking one another, a bicameral legislature to resolve disputes between large and small states, an independent judiciary, and a federal system dividing power between national and state governments. This structure aimed to prevent tyranny, reflecting fears of both monarchy and mob rule. The proposed constitution then went to state ratifying conventions. In some states, the turning point was a compromise. Influential anti-federalists agreed to ratify after Federalists pledged to immediately pursue amendments guaranteeing fundamental rights, ratify now, amend later. The United States of America, under the Constitution, officially began on March 4, 1789, when the first Congress convened in New York City. James Madison, who had once been ambivalent about a Bill of Rights, took the lead in drafting a set of amendments. By December 15, 1791, 10 of them had been ratified by the requisite 3/4 of the states, becoming the Bill of Rights. When Americans think of their liberties, the First Amendment comes first to mind. It safeguards freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. By protecting these rights, the framers believed political debate would flourish, abuses would be exposed, and democracy would remain healthy. Freedom of religion was equally paramount. Many early Americans had fled persecution in Europe, and the new nation would have no established church or religious test for office. The Second Amendment reflected the suspicion of standing armies in a young republic and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Having resented British attempts to disarm them, and with militias having played a crucial role in the Revolution, Americans viewed citizen soldiers as both a check on centralized power and a safeguard against tyranny. Whatever its modern controversies, its original aim was civic preparedness in defense of liberty. The Third Amendment addressed a grievance that helped ignite the Revolution, the forced quartering of soldiers in private homes. By forbidding it in peacetime without consent and requiring legal procedures even in war, the amendment treated the home as a sanctuary of personal autonomy. The Fourth Amendment responded to the hated general warrants or writs of assistance used by British authorities to search homes and shops without individualized suspicion. It guaranteed that warrants for searches or arrests must be supported by probable cause and specifically describe the place and persons or things to be seized. This principle placed law enforcement firmly under the rule of law and required respect for privacy and dignity. Sometimes called the Great Safeguard, the Fifth Amendment stands as a fortress of liberty. It bars double jeopardy, ensuring no one can be tried twice for the same offense, and forbids compelled self-incrimination. It also requires grand jury indictments for serious crimes, guarantees due process before life, liberty, or property may be taken, and demands just compensation when private property is seized for public use. These protections were forged in response to abuses like those of the infamous Star Chamber, which coerced confessions and dispensed punishment without fair trial, as well as to fears that the new republic might emulate monarchs in seizing property unchecked. At its core, the Fifth Amendment is not only a legal shield but a moral compass balancing authority with individual rights. The Sixth Amendment guarantees a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, the right to know the charges, to confront and cross-examine witnesses, to compel favorable testimony, and to have legal counsel. These provisions were designed to prevent the abuses seen in colonial courts, where under British rule, Americans were sometimes sent to England for trial, held indefinitely without knowing their charges, and condemned by biased judges. While the Sixth Amendment deals with criminal trials, the Seventh Amendment guarantees the right to a jury trial in federal civil cases and limits judges from overriding jury decisions on factual matters. It was designed to preserve this tradition amid concerns that U.S. federal courts might adopt European-style systems where judges decide cases without juries. The Eighth Amendment is brief but powerful. It prohibits excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. Having witnessed public whippings for minor crimes and political dissidents bankrupted through steep fines, the Founding Fathers sought to ensure justice would remain humane and proportional. Rather than listing specific penalties, the amendment drew a moral boundary: punishment must not violate human dignity. Perhaps the most enigmatic of the Bill of Rights, the Ninth Amendment warns against the trap of enumeration. Listing rights must not imply others were forfeited. James Madison proposed it to ease anti-federalist fears that enumerating rights would diminish unlisted ones. To the framers, rights were natural, God-given, and too numerous to catalog. Though rarely invoked directly by courts, the Ninth has lingered in debates about implied rights such as privacy. Rounding out the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment reaffirms federalism's central bargain. Powers not delegated to the United States nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states or the people. The national government wields enumerated powers, the rest remain local. With the first 10 amendments adopted, the nation faced new challenges, and further amendments followed, each born of necessity. The 11th Amendment became the first constitutional correction to a Supreme Court ruling. In Chisholm v. Georgia, the court held that a private citizen could sue a state in federal court, alarming states like Georgia that resisted being compelled to pay Revolutionary War debts. Ratification of the 11th Amendment reasserted financial sovereignty and limited federal judicial power, establishing a precedent for recalibrating authority when experience required. In the same spirit, the 12th Amendment fixed flaws in the original presidential election system. Initially, electors cast 2 votes for president, and the runner-up became vice president. Once political parties emerged, this system proved unworkable, producing situations such as rivals Adams and Jefferson serving together, and the tie between Jefferson and Burr in 1800. To prevent future chaos, the amendment required separate votes for president and vice president and clarified procedures if no candidate secured a majority. The Reconstruction era brought the most transformative changes. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. Passed in January 1865 and ratified that December, it declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist under U.S. jurisdiction. Coming at the end of the Civil War, it built on Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which freed 4 million African Americans in Confederate areas, but didn't end slavery nationwide. The amendment completed that mission, marking America's second founding. The 14th Amendment followed in 1868, accomplishing 3 major things. It granted citizenship to all born or naturalized in the United States, overturning Dred Scott v. Sanford. It prohibited states from denying equal protection or due process, and it restricted former Confederate officials from office unless approved by Congress. Ratified in 1870, the 15th Amendment declared that voting rights could not be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, effectively granting black men the constitutional right to vote. During Reconstruction, African American men voted and held office under federal protection, but as Reconstruction waned, Southern states used violence, intimidation, and legal tactics, like poll taxes and literacy tests, to suppress black voters. Despite the amendment, widespread disenfranchisement persisted for nearly a century until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 finally enforced this promise. After a 40-year pause in constitutional amendments, the Progressive Era brought major reforms. The 16th Amendment, ratified in 1913, empowered Congress to impose income taxes without apportioning them based on state population. It overturned the Supreme Court's 1895 Pollock decision, which had blocked federal income taxes and favored wealthy interests. Reformers pushed back, arguing that a progressive income tax was a fairer way to fund government and reduce tariffs that burdened consumers. By 1910, bipartisan support, including from President Taft, helped drive the amendment forward, modernizing and stabilizing national revenue. The 17th Amendment, also ratified in 1913, established the direct election of U.S. senators by the people. Originally, senators were chosen by state legislatures to give states a strong voice in federal government and to check popular passions. But by the late 1800s, the system was plagued by corruption and deadlocks, with wealthy interests accused of buying Senate seats. A bribery scandal involving Senator William Lorimer of Illinois highlighted the need for reform. Direct election gave citizens a stronger voice while curbing corruption. In 1919, the 18th Amendment launched Prohibition, banning the manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol. It stemmed from decades of temperance activism, which blamed alcohol for poverty, crime, and domestic abuse. At first, alcohol consumption and related arrests declined, but organized crime flourished, with figures like Al Capone profiting from the black market. By the late 1920s, Prohibition was widely seen as a failure. The 19th Amendment, ratified on August 18, 1920, granted women the right to vote after more than 70 years of activism. Beginning with Seneca Falls in 1848, the suffrage movement grew into a mass campaign by the 1910s, with women lobbying, protesting, and sacrificing for the cause. Their contributions during World War I helped push Congress to pass the amendment in 1919. Ratification hinged on Tennessee, where Representative Harry Byrne, swayed by a letter from his mother, cast the decisive vote. Still, many women of color remained disenfranchised due to racial laws, lack of citizenship, and restrictive immigration policies. The modern era of amendments began with the 20th, ratified in January 1933. It addressed the outdated 4-month gap between elections and the start of new terms by moving the start date to January 3rd for Congress and January 20th for the president, while also clarifying presidential succession. The original schedule had accommodated slow 18th century travel, but in the modern age it left outgoing leaders powerless in times of crisis. President Buchanan's inaction during Southern secession after Lincoln's election in 1860, and President Hoover's ineffectiveness during the worsening Depression after FDR's victory in 1932, both underscored the danger. The only instance of one constitutional amendment repealing another, the 21st Amendment, marks a mirror image twist in the Prohibition saga. Ratified in December 1933, it overturned the 18th Amendment, ending the national prohibition experiment after nearly 14 years. This repeal acknowledged that the so-called noble experiment had backfired, fueling organized crime, widespread defiance of the law, and corruption, while eroding public respect for institutions. Franklin D. Roosevelt's unprecedented 4-term presidency directly prompted the 22nd Amendment, which limits presidents to 2 elected terms, or a maximum of 10 years if completing part of another's term. For most of U.S. history, the two-term tradition established by George Washington in 1796 had been honored. FDR broke with precedent by securing third and fourth terms, citing the Great Depression and World War II as justification for continuity. His extended tenure sparked concerns about the concentration of executive power. Following his death in 1945, a Republican-led Congress passed the amendment in 1947, and it was ratified in 1951. The 23rd Amendment, ratified in 1961, granted residents of Washington, D.C., the right to vote in presidential elections, partially remedying a long-standing Democratic gap. Though the Constitution designated D.C. as a federal district rather than a state, its growing population, over 760,000 by 1960, more than several states, made disenfranchisement increasingly unjust. The 24th Amendment, ratified in January 1964, abolished the poll tax in federal elections, striking down one of the South's most effective tools of voter suppression. Despite the 15th Amendment's promise of voting rights regardless of race, many states had used poll taxes to disenfranchise black voters and poor whites. Eliminating them marked a major victory for the civil rights movement. The 25th Amendment came into existence as the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963 and Lyndon Johnson's health concerns exposed serious gaps in the Constitution's rules for presidential succession and incapacity. It clarified that the vice president becomes president upon vacancy, provided a process for filling a vacant vice presidency, and established procedures for handling presidential disability. Section 4, allowing the Vice President and Cabinet to declare the President unfit, remains unused but stands as an important safeguard. Ratified on July 1, 1971, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, adding millions of young voters to the electorate. The slogan "Old enough to fight, old enough to vote," popular during World War II and revived in the Vietnam era, captured the urgency of the cause. Mounting pressure led Congress to include a voting age provision in the 1970 renewal of the Voting Rights Act, paving the way for swift ratification. The 27th Amendment, ratified in 1992, has perhaps the quirkiest story. Originally proposed over 200 years earlier as part of the original package of amendments Madison submitted for the Bill of Rights, it resurfaced thanks to a persistent college student, Gregory Watson, who discovered it had no ratification deadline. It prevents any law-changing congressional salaries from taking effect until after the next House election, ensuring lawmakers cannot grant themselves instant pay raises. Above all, the Constitution's story shows the enduring importance of this founding charter. It has proved robust enough to govern a vast and diverse nation for over 2 centuries, yet flexible enough to adapt when justice or necessity demand a change. Each amendment stands as a testament to the idea that we the people can reshape our highest law to reflect our highest ideals. The Constitution began as a compact to create a more perfect union, not a perfect one, but a quest for one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deeper look into the extraordinary history of the Constitution of the United States, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our next journey through history. See you next time.